Happy Tuesday, friends. It is day 22 of our Matthew Bible reading plan. I hope you're enjoying this reading so far. We're in chapter 6 today, smack in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. This is one of Jesus' most famous series of teachings, and today is no exception. It's the Lord's Prayer. Chances are, even if you didn't grow up in church, you're familiar with this prayer. We say it every single Sunday here at HBUMC in worship. And when you do that, things can become a little rote, like maybe you're just going through the motions. That was definitely true for me. And it wasn't until I heard this that I'm going to share with you this morning, this new way of looking at the Lord's Prayer, that it really came to life for me in a new way that changed the way I think about this prayer, yes, but also how I'm called to respond after praying the Lord's Prayer. So if you have your Matthew books with you, we're on page 30. If you're reading in your own Bible, then we're going to be in Matthew 6, starting in verse 9. Right away, Jesus tells his disciples, pray like this. He just assumes that they're going to pray, right? He doesn't, say, now remember, you have to pray. He just says, when you pray, pray like this. And he gets right into it, giving us a model for how we're called to pray. Now, if you read it and you think about this question, who is the focus of the prayer? What you'll see is that it's actually divided into two main sections. In verses 9 and 10, God is the focus. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done. God's the focus. The first half, these two verses, all about our relationship with God and what it means to love God. And then 11 through 13 is actually all about us. It's all about us. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. Two halves of the Lord's Prayer. The first is all about God. The second half is all about us. Now, where do you think Jesus got this idea from? If you've ever wondered, then flip with me to Matthew 22. And this is another famous story of Jesus that you've probably heard in some context before. It's on page 124 if you're in your Matthew book. If not, we're in Matthew 22. We're going to start in verse 34. This is the story about the expert in the law who comes to test Jesus to figure out where he stands when it comes to interpretation. Like we do the same thing today, right? We think that if we can figure out where a person stands on one thing, we can kind of deduce where they stand on everything else. And that's what this teacher is doing. And so he's trying to figure out where Jesus stands, and he asks him this question: which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus answers him and he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your mind. This would have been no surprise. This would have been like, yeah, Jesus, we got that. No big deal here. The scribe would have been like, yes, I'm writing this down. This is the Shema prayer, a very, very famous prayer in the Jewish world, something they would have prayed every single day. No surprise. And it's all about loving God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. But here's the surprising thing. Jesus doesn't stop here. He actually keeps going. He says, this is the first and greatest commandment, and a second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, by saying a second is like it, what Jesus is saying here is that you have love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Like we try and figure out which one is more important. Jesus is saying you can't do that. It's like it. Love God, love others are exactly the same. Your love for God is absolutely tied to your love for others, and the two can't be separated. And we know this is true instinctively because don't you know people who feel like they love God, right? They know the Bible, they can talk about it really well. They seem to be in love with Jesus, but when you see how they treat other people, it raises a big question mark. Or the opposite is true. We all know people who aren't Christian, but do really well at loving other people, even better than some Christians sometimes. And what Jesus is saying here, all of the law is summed up in these two commands, not just one, but two. Love God and love others. They're totally tied together. You can't have one without the other. Okay, why am I talking about this? Well, go back to the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, and let's look at it one more time. We already said how the first half is all about loving God. But what about the second half? Is there some way that we see that loving others reflected there? Well, I think so. Here's the temptation we always run into with the Lord's Prayer. I know this is true for me. I assume that it might be true for you, but maybe you're different, and that's okay too. When we pray this in church, we say, "Give us this day our daily bread." Who are you thinking about when you say that? I know for me, a lot of the times I'm tempted to think about myself. And maybe it's not daily bread that I'm praying for. Maybe it's patience. Actually, a lot of the times I'm praying for patience. Maybe it's a provision of some other kind, like money or something that I feel like I need. Give me, Lord, this daily bread. I'm thinking about myself. And it's true for the rest of this too. Forgive me what I have done, God. Lead me not into temptation. Deliver me from evil. But that's not the language that's actually being used here. Look at it again. It's not singular language. It's plural language. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts. Deliver us from evil. What's happening here is that this is actually not about us as individuals at all. It's about us as a Christian community. Remember, Jesus's followers, when they were praying this, they would have been out at 3:00 in the market, maybe doing their shopping, looking around them and seeing all the people who were in need. And this prayer, Jesus is using it as a way to actually stop us from thinking all about ourselves and actually getting us thinking about those people instead. It's a constant reminder to think about the people around us who are in need. So when we're at the market and we say, "Give us this day our daily bread," we may have enough, but we're clearly going to see people who don't. What can we do for them? Or you may see people who you don't feel like you need to be forgiven, but do you know people who don't know that they're forgiven by God? Or maybe there's someone in your life who you need to offer forgiveness to. And you may not be dealing with a big temptation in your life. Maybe that's not your struggle. Maybe it is. But you definitely know someone else who is going through something, a temptation like this, that you could help them walk through. You see, this is all about loving others. This whole prayer, the Lord's Prayer, it's the Jesus creed of Matthew 22, the two greatest commandments summed up in this prayer. That's what Jesus is doing, and it would have been revolutionary for the ancient world in which he lived. No one would have combined loving God and loving others on the same plane. And the gift that Jesus is giving us in the Lord's Prayer is not this rote prayer that we just have to say over and over again every Sunday, thinking only of ourselves. It's actually a call to action for us to be part of answering the very prayer that we're praying. You see, when we say to God, "Hallowed be your name," holy be your name, we're called to think about all the ways that God's name is being used in the world, and how are we as a community being part of that? Are we using God's name for good, or are we using it for bad? And when we say, "Your kingdom come and your will be done," God's reminding us that we're partners with God in bringing that kingdom here and now into the world. And we do that through all the ways that we love other people, by helping our neighbors with their daily bread, right? And forgiving others just as we too have been forgiven. And not just walking through temptation ourselves, but using our stories to help other people who are now dealing with those temptations. The Lord's Prayer is such a beautiful picture of what it looks like to live in God's kingdom. We are a community. We have to do it together. And so every time that we pray this prayer, I hope that you're actually doing it more than just on Sundays. Jesus, again, his followers would have done a prayer like this 3 times a day. What would that look like for you at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to pray this prayer? And maybe that's too intense for you, but what would it look like to do this at least one time a day? What would it bring to mind that not just can help you, but how it can help other people? What I see this as is a reminder that prayer is not just something that we say and then we let go of, and now it's in God's hands, like the ball is in his court. What the Lord's Prayer reminds us is that we as Christians are called to act, not just pray. Our prayer has to be backed up in loving ways to care for the people around us. Yes, we love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength. We pray that God's name would be hallowed in the world, that his kingdom would come. But then we are also part of making that happen. And we do that here in community with each other. So I don't know about you, but to me, this totally changes the way I think about the Lord's Prayer. And I hope that when you hear it this Sunday, that you'll remember these words and that this prayer would come alive for you in a way that maybe it hasn't been in a long time. That's my hope for you. I hope that you have a wonderful week. I hope that you're enjoying, again, reading through the Matthew plan with us. I would love to hear from you, whether you have questions about this teaching or questions about anything that you're dealing with through Matthew. Send me an email or comment down below, and I can't wait to connect with you. Hope you have a wonderful day. God bless you, friends.